And what are a couple, three things that you're really concerned about right now?
You know, I mean, uh, you know, we talked about this, right? Is duck hunters are pretty optimistic folks, or we wouldn't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go stay in the mud and the cattails, right? But I'm really hopeful that we're going to finally have a breakthrough on this MBHI.
Describe that.
Type 1 wetland that may only be wet for a couple weeks in the spring, really super valuable when ducks are first returning. They typically dry out before some of the ducks even arrive, but really important for mallards and pintails. Type 2, temporary wetlands. Those wetlands typically persist a month or two in an average year. In a wet year, they could persist throughout the spring. Both of them are very important. Ephemerals more for resources for nesting females. Temporaries are important as we start to talk about duck distribution on the prairies and settling patterns. So, they're very small, very shallow, at extraordinarily high risk to drainage because they're small and shallow. In the Senate, as an example, Republicans have a slight majority in the Senate, but you don't pass legislation like this without 60 votes. Mm-hmm. So it has to be bipartisan. And the Republican majority in the House is very narrow, so it likely needs some Democrat support to pass out of the House. So it needs to be true, good bipartisan legislation to make it through the process and get it onto the president's desk.
It's so simple, even a caveman can do it?
Yeah, it's so easy. John Devney, a duck hunter, can do it. Yeah.
Delta Waterfowl is the duck hunters organization, and what we're doing is managing out here to increase duck production.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl. Brought to you by Rig'em and Lucky Duck.
Welcome to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Brice. To many duck hunters, the mention of agricultural policy advocacy might cause your eyes to glaze over and head to the garage to rig decoys, change oil in the outboard, or something else equally important. But the fact is, the contents of the U.S. Farm Bill that's supposed to be renewed every 5 years directly impacts how many ducks will or won't get the chance to check out the paint job on those decoys. Delta Waterfowl scrutinizes and seeks to impact what's included in each new farm bill to benefit ducks and hunters. And no one on Team Delta is a greater advocate for duck and hunter-friendly agricultural policies that secure waterfowl habitat than Chief Policy Officer and my colleague, John Devney. John was the architect and test pilot of Delta's Working Wetlands initiative that was actually written into the 2018 Farm Bill and is now known as the Migratory Bird Habitat Initiative. His office is just a few doors down from mine, so when questions pop up on U.S. and Canadian ag policy, it's easy for us to jump on a podcast and get them answered. With that introduction, let's get started. John Devney, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, we're doing this, been doing this with some frequency here the last few weeks.
Yeah, hey, tapping back into that, last time we talked about this, I don't have a t-shirt for you yet.
What t-shirt?
Well, the most frequent appearing guest on the podcast.
Do I get a t-shirt?
I have to make one.
Do they make kids extra larges?
I know they'll be on sale, right? Or cheaper than
yeah, that's the good news is when you're a little itty bitty guy, you can find stuff on sale. It's how I buy all my shoes, man.
You ever bought shoes from a kid section?
No, but it's pretty hard to find. When you get size 7.5 feet, like there's not a lot of options.
So they're just in stock.
They're
They're just in stock and eventually overstocked and then sold on discount.
Yeah, because the two people on the planet that have size 7.5 shoes would go buy them at that store that day. So yeah. So I'll be looking forward to get my Youth XL t-shirt.
I'm just going to talk off camera here to Cole. Cole, I think we probably should put in a request for some t-shirts. That'd be a good idea. Yeah. Well, right on. John, thanks a lot. Yeah, we were just on here just a little bit ago, it feels like, talking about the bee pop.
Yep.
You and Frank, and that was a good discussion. So, dry conditions, room for optimism. We've had my wife told me about 4 inches of rain here in kind of the Bismarck-Mandan area in the last week. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think places down by Mobridge, South Dakota, and kind of over in that Eureka country, I'm hearing 10 to 12 inches.
Holy.
So, yeah, and, as you well know, rain in August and September in this part of the world is an incredible blessing. Now, you and I aren't wheat farmers, so we don't have to deal with that challenge, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
almost everybody else in the world is pretty delighted to have the moisture, and any duck guy gets pretty excited about having rains in August and September because it sets the table for next spring for sure.
Yeah, it does. I think if you look at, you're looking at a wetland from the eye of a duck, I kind of think about it as a cup. And you need to pour water in there. And you can pour the water in the summer, in the fall, winter, or spring. I don't know about you, John. Me personally, I love that fall.
Fall moisture is really important. Sets up that frost seal. Hopefully we get some good moisture this winter, runs off good. We've got a good start. And hopefully, as a colleague was saying yesterday, maybe this is a turn where we're starting to see, Saskatchewan's had beneficial rain. So Manitoba's had crazy rains here in the last week too. Alberta's been getting pretty wet the last 6 weeks. And, hey, knock on wood, maybe we'll break out of this drought we've been dealing with for a long time.
Yeah, and I think for the listener, rains right now aren't, I don't know that they're really, maybe there's some late broods that might be receiving, but they're probably old enough to be mobile enough on their own. So we're talking more about fall hunting.
Yep, which is important.
Help us and hunters coming into this part of the world. More opportunity to find a wetland. But then, it's just really setting the table for next spring's effort. So this is good news. And it's kind of nice to look out the window.
And see it green.
That's right. Absolutely. So, hey, today, bringing you on the podcast, not to bury the lead, is we're going to talk about ag policy. And I would say specifically the intersect between agriculture and conservation.
Yep.
So maybe for the listener, John, what does ag policy mean to you? Like, just kind of categorically, what are you working on in that arena and Delta's working on?
I think generally it's about how do we find ways to create economic incentives through U.S. Department of Agriculture, NRCS in the U.S. context, different venues in Canada, we can talk about that later, to create a stimulus for farmers and ranchers do stuff that's good for conservation and in our specific interest, things that are good for ducks. Mm-hmm. And, the listeners may not be super aware of this, but the Farm Bill, as an example, is the single greatest investment the American public makes in conservation. And, I'm sure there's folks that have been watching our feed, Ducks Unlimited's feed, Pheasants Forever's feed, anybody that's involved in conservation in serious ways engaged in the Farm Bill debate. They might go, why are they spending all this time talking about the Farm Bill? But, candidly, it's one of the biggest investments we make. And so being at the table, helping to, guide good policy and good programs is really key for all the conservation groups because, as we've talked about a lot in the past, take a state like North Dakota, over 90% of the duck production potential exists on privately owned farms and ranches. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to get good outcomes for ducks, it's going to be because we find good ways to work collaboratively with farmers and ranchers, and especially in ways that augments their opportunities to monetize those benefits and helps their production long term too. So that's, that would be sort of my assessment of the nexus between ag policy, conservation policy, and why as a duck hunter you might care about it.
Good overview. I haven't heard this term for quite some time. I don't know that it's disappeared, but it was quite trendy. Ecological goods and services, and the concept is that if you think of a farm like a business, you get paid for crops, outputs, or
cows, fattened calves.
Yeah, and so you do something, you get paid.
Right.
But I think when ecological goods and services, or basically it's just the bucket that you described, is that think of the environmental or ecological benefits, of which ducks are one of them.
Right.
Wetlands are one, carbon sequestration, all those are
water quality.
If you put that like a crop,
right.
Yeah, we do feel that incentives to secure those natural assets are important.
Right. And farmers are good at growing things. Ranchers are good at growing grass. And so I think our orientation at Delta has always been, why aren't we empowering these people in a way to grow ducks the same way they grow wheat or canola or corn or soybeans, to grow ducks. And it was, going back to the old early days of Alice, that was sort of the central premise. And, here in the United States, we have this big framework through the Farm Bill and Title II, or the conservation title of the Farm Bill, that can create those market signals in voluntary incentive-based programs for farmers to participate in. So, yeah, it's a big deal, and it's, sort of a universally big deal within the conservation community.
Lucky Duck is a proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. While being an industry leader in waterfowl motion decoys is their focus, they have the hunter in mind when designing all of their products. From their 5-star crash-rated Lucky Duck kennel to their full line of predator hunting gear, they are committed to serving the hunter 365 days a year. Check out their wonderful line of products at www.luckyduck.com or at a local retailer near you. Great. Well, let's unbox this subject. So just for the reader's benefit, we're gonna kind of start out talking that ag conservation intersect in the U.S. prairies.
Yep.
And then we're going to jump into the Canadian prairies.
Yep.
Then we're going to jump into the southern U.S.,
Yep.
which is really important for our members and constituents,
Yep.
southern duck hunters and producers. And then we're going to plant some seeds for hope, some
Yep.
of the bright spots that are coming ahead. And then also the last question I'm going to have you answer is, what can our members and listeners do to best help, secure a positive outcome for the waterfowl resource?
Yep.
So let's start here, right, in the U.S., the Farm Bill. Again, you talked about it, John, but the Farm Bill has had, if I understand it correctly, it's had a few different names over time.
Right.
But everybody hears about it.
It's the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, what was it, the Food Securities Act,
Yep.
or a few other different things.
Yep.
But talk about the history from our interest in the Farm Bill. Where did we really start caring about the Farm Bill?
Well, I think there's some key moments in history. The first one is before we were even born, which is back in the 60s when the federal government got involved in soil bank, which was a way to idle marginal cropland, put it under permanent cover. And if you talk to folks that were around during those soil bank years, especially when it comes to pheasants, big, massive spike in pheasant populations, right? It was a program that was in the Dakotas for sure, probably in western Minnesota, probably western Iowa too, Nebraska, Kansas. But the real sort of catalyzing event was the 1985 Farm Bill. And interestingly enough, we're kind of in a similar moment today with the ag economy. A lot of concern today about, the cost of production has gone way up, access to markets has declined, commodity prices are low. We found ourselves in a similar place in 1985 where the farm economy was in shambles. And the 1985 Farm Bill sort of was the first really intentional move to capture conservation as part of the baseline of the Farm Bill. Programs that we know about, acronyms we use every day, that's when CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program, started. That's when the precursor to the Waterfowl Easement Program, WRP, started. That's when Conservation Compliance started and Swamp Buster started. So 1985 was sort of the point in time where the policy vision at the time said, if there's a way for us, and it was in the context probably about the environment, probably about conservation, but it was really a drive to find a way to make farmers whole in a very difficult time. And so that's been sustained and grown to where we are now many, many, many years later. So now it is just, every, ag committee, whether you're majority or minority, has people that are Title II experts, because it's important enough to the politicians, it's important enough to the committees, it's important enough to getting a Farm Bill passed that it has dedicated resources and dedicated experts.
So inside the Farm Bill, you name dropped Swamp Buster, you name dropped CRP, and I don't know that they necessarily need individual explanation per se, but there's just straight ag economics in the Farm Bill too.
Lots
right?
of it, yeah.
Most of it?
Most of it is actually in food support. It's in the
Right.
nutrition title. So the majority of the Farm Bill isn't about producing a crop, and it's not about producing a mallard. It's about taking care of folks in need. And so the overwhelming majority of the resources in the sort of big box of the Farm Bill are in the nutrition program.
Okay.
Then you have, the crop insurance program, which is the way that we primarily support production agriculture today. Then there's direct commodity support, and then there's all sorts of other smaller programs. But yeah, it's a massive piece of legislation. The way in one of the, I'm sure there's listeners that are like, well, this is complicated. You got, nutrition programs, SNAP as an example, production, agriculture, and conservation in this big bundle. Say, man, that doesn't make much sense. But the reality is it really has worked because that's what creates the bipartisan consensus and coalition to pass a farm bill every 5 years.
Okay.
If it was just about the nutrition title, there'd be a lot of folks that wouldn't matter that much to. If it was just about production agriculture, there'd be a lot of folks that just wouldn't matter to. If it was just about conservation, there's a lot of folks that just wouldn't matter to. But when you put them all together, this is where you get bipartisan, bicameral support generally, and why the Farm Bill has been one of the great bastions of bipartisanship over the years, because all these interests sort of come around together in one big piece of legislation.
So it's kind of like, I'm annoyingly interested in analogies, but it's like you and I both wanting a pizza, but wanting different toppings.
Right.
So we pool in on a pizza, and my half has some ingredients and your half has the other.
Mine has sausage, and sausage. Yours half can have whatever, kind of weird vegetable thing you
so
want.
now
Yours. Yeah.
lots of slices individually
Right.
ordered and customized.
Exactly.
You have a farm bill.
Right, exactly.
I like that. You can use that if you want to.
Can I?
I don't think you're that
probably not.
interested in it, but all right. So for 1985, renewed every 5 years, or
So typically, farm bills are have a 5-year authorization. So the last one that was passed was signed by President Trump in December of 2018. If you're good at math, that's more than 5 years.
Mhm.
So we've been under a series of extensions.
gotcha.
And we're at the point now where Congress is going to have to affirmatively act to extend the Farm Bill again before the end of September, or the Farm Bill will lapse.
Yep.
So we expect that will happen. There's no indication that won't happen. What changed in the current environment is when Republicans in the House and Senate passed their reconciliation bills this summer, it dealt with a lot of the farm issues. It dealt with some Title II conservation issues. It dealt with a lot of crop insurance issues. And so a lot of the issues in the Farm Bill were actually dealt with through reconciliation. But, we were a member of a coalition of 300 some organizations with major farm group, national farm groups, state and local farm groups, conservation groups that sent a letter to Congress. Is like, listen, we recognize a lot of this work's been done, but we also know there's a lot more work to do, and you got to pass a clean farm bill. Probably the most glaring example, and again, it can be dealt with through an extension, is the authorization for the Conservation Reserve Program expires at the end of September. I don't think there's a lot of risk in that, but they need to take that affirmative action to keep that program moving ahead.
Okay. So yeah, we're mid-September, end of September's right around the corner.
2 weeks away.
Yeah. So I think in this episode, I think two things we want to share with the listeners. One, just kind of a basic education background of maybe some programs that people aren't familiar with, but then two, to give a status update, and we can come back on here, as more updates are due. But what are your predictions with the Farm Bill?
I mean, we'll pass an extension. Beyond that, I can't really tell. I think there's enthusiasm for all, we call it the four corners, right? So the majority and the minority in the House, and the majority and the minority in the Senate, which we call the four corners. So, of course, Republicans are in charge of both chambers. They're in the majority in both the House and the Senate. Democrats are the minority in both. what we've heard from all four corners is that there's a will to do it. The question is, there's lots going on in DC these days, and can they take the time to go through that? It's, you're right. Go back to your pizza analogy. It takes a lot more time to make two pizzas out of one than it is to take. And so there's a lot of negotiation. There's a lot of back and forth. And so it's just about how do we get those people the space and time to deliberate, negotiate, and come up with a piece of consensus legislation. Because in the Senate, as an example, Republicans have a slight majority in the Senate, but you don't pass legislation like this without 60 votes. So it has to be bipartisan. And the Republican majority in the House is very narrow, so it likely needs some Democrat support to pass out of the House. So it needs to be true, good bipartisan legislation to make it through the process and get it onto the president's desk.
Which therein lies time. Right?
Time.
Yeah. Gotcha. Now, I think this is a proud moment for you, John. So I always knew it as Working Wetlands, or we did. That's what we talked about it. But I guess we'll call it a program now. It's now the Migratory Bird Habitat Initiative. It was a concept that you, Delta, I'm not sure. I don't want to give credit where it's not due, so I'm going to leave it to you. But this was something that you championed as a pilot, and now it's an actual program. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we got it in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it comes out of conversations that we had way back when with the North Dakota farm groups, and said, where are the places that we can find common ground? And, there's been a history in North Dakota where sometimes there's been conflicts between the conservation community and the farming community. And this was our effort to sort of bring those people in. And this issue about small wetlands and cropland was immediately clear. You were in on the second meeting with that farm group leadership. And it's one of these interesting issues because it's a sort of perpetual frustration source for farmers, but they're the most important assets for breeding ducks, which makes them the most important assets for duck hunters. And so that exercise, I think, created a vision for a program that sort of checked all the boxes for us, for farmers, for ducks, for duck hunters. Had a great, wildly successful pilot project here in North Dakota. Did some pretty cool social science around it that was super helpful. Lots of meetings, lots of work going into the 2018 Farm Bill. Passed the 2018 Farm Bill. It's in there. It's pretty depressing when you spend that much of your life on something and you see it reduced to about that much text in a massive piece of legislation. But because we've been pretty dogmatic and really, really deliberate, and as our partners, folks like DU, folks like TRCP, really pursuing this, 2020, the Trump administration rolls out the Prairie, Pothole, Water Quality, and Wildlife Program. When the Biden administration comes in, we sort of repackaged it, made some changes and some suggestions. Became the Migratory Bird Resurgence Initiative. And at its peak, that program was investing, $15-ish million, both in prairies, wetlands up here in the prairies, and post-harvest flooding, which I know we'll talk about later. And right now, we're working to get it in front of the Trump administration for an even bigger investment. So, yeah, we haven't hit the home run yet that we hope to hit, but there's been good, steady progress. And if we're successful, our goal would be a program that conserves 56% of the remaining small wetlands and cropland in the U.S. Prairie Pothole region, which would be a huge, significant conservation outcome.
That's huge. So there was a milestone of having it recognized and creation of a program. But when you say maybe underwhelming, it's just not funded to the degree.
We haven't got the funding levels up there the way we want them.
Well, yeah, I'm confident it's going to happen.
I am too. One of the things that happened in the reconciliation package that we talked about earlier is there's a lot of money in those programs right now. When the Democrats passed reconciliation during the Biden administration. They put a lot of money into USDA, lots and lots and lots of it. And there was about 12 million of it left. And so the Republicans during the reconciliation process put that into the conservation program baseline. So those programs are there forever now. It's about $12 billion. It's a lot of dough. And one of the things the Republicans did is took the climate sideboards off of those practices. So now we think we're in a position to say, listen, here's a great opportunity to spend some of that found money, reward landowners for conserving these resources. It's good for ducks, it's good for duck hunters, good for water quality, it's good for all these values. Now's the time.
Okay. One last question on the Farm Bill, and then we'll move on to Canada. So the Farm Bill, when it's extended, is it extended in totality? Like the Farm Bill, border to border, is extended, so it's not just parts of it.
Yeah, because it takes a village, right? You leave somebody out of the village, you're not going to vote for it. It's not going to get an extension.
Gotcha.
So it takes those people to come together to get it even passed, to get it extended.
So nothing can get left behind.
Exactly.
Okay. That any worries I might have had, that kind of calmed them in the sense of there's so much. I mean, if you don't love conservation, there's so much good stuff in there.
Right.
For the producers, for nutrition. And
for rural communities and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Better. Okay, Canada. Growing up, I don't think I knew that much about Canada. I mean, we went there. It was a great place to fish, is what I remember. A great place to rent a cabin, great place to hunt. But wow, I didn't know much about the ag industry, the landscape there, but it is way different when you cross that border.
Way different.
Way different. Like this whole Farm Bill thing is just not a parallel.
There isn't. Canada's very different because the way Canada supports their agricultural producers, their farmers and ranchers, is not sort of this big USDA thing. It's a shared responsibility between the province and the federal government.
Okay.
So it's considerably more decentralized. There's times when I think that's beneficial. I think there's other times when I feel like that's not that beneficial, but that's the way it is. And so a lot of the programming, versus, when we're working on something like, Working Wetlands that becomes MBHI, the focus for your energy is at Congress and the administration, right? When you're working on it, and we'll talk about some of the great work Jim Fisher's done in the Canadian Prairies to look after small wetlands up there, it's all provincial. The effort is all provincial. I mean, there's some prospective federal nexus, but the energy is really focused on provincial decision makers more than it is federal decision makers.
Okay, so I would imagine, the federal Farm Bill, there are focus areas and priority areas, but in theory, when you pass that at the federal level, it's applied to the states.
Right.
Where in Canada, you could do something in one jurisdiction, and
Totally
it's an entirely different conversation, an additional conversation.
Right, exactly.
Not that you can't create momentum.
Right, that's right.
Synergies.
Right.
But it's very jurisdictional.
Jurisdiction by jurisdiction, province by province.
So take this where you want to, John. What are some of the, in the ag policy conservation realm, what are some of the big news items that duck hunters would be interested in? And you don't have to, but you can restrict it just to what Delta's working on.
Well, I mean, I'll speak to the stuff Delta's working on. Jim Fisher went into the Manitoba government. And Manitoba government did something here during the Pallister government, which is, this was a little bit before 2020. And the Pallister government wanted to pass wetland regulations. But the government had to do the art of the possible, right? And they had lots of stakeholders around that, folks from conservation, folks from the ag community. And basically what the Pallister government said is we're going to protect wetlands class 3, 4, and 5. And that was the sort of negotiated place they get to. Well, Jim Fisher said, well, geez Louise, that means we're going to create this moral hazard for these type 1 and 2 wetlands. And so Jim worked very hard for a number of years to create this voluntary incentive-based working land tool to conserve those type 1 and 2 wetlands and cropland. And I remember being up at the Duck Symposium at Winnipeg, and I was driving up. I got a call from a friend of ours in the Manitoba government and said, you know, you got to be at Okamic tomorrow morning. There's a big announcement coming. And Brian Pallister announced at that point this idea of growing outcomes in watersheds. And it was really interesting because the way the Pallister government did it was they took money out of the government coffers and parked it in a trust out of government, which is a really cool idea because, as you know, CRP, it has so much money, you spend it, and then you got to get it reauthorized. The beautiful thing about this model is those dollars were there locked away in perpetuity outside of nobody's priorities could ever change or any of the rest of that stuff.
Sure.
And one of the key focal points that the Premier Brian Pallister mentioned at the time was this focus on type 1 and 2 wetlands, which is directly attributable to Jim Fisher's work.
Just for the listener, real fast, type 1, type 2. Describe
Type 1, wetland that may only be wet for a couple weeks in the spring, really super valuable when ducks are first returning. They typically dry out before some of the ducks even arrive, but really important for mallards and pintails. Type 2, temporary wetlands. Those wetlands typically persist a month or two in an average year. In a wet year, they could persist throughout the spring. Both of them are very important. Ephemerals more for resources for nesting females. Temporaries are important as we start to talk about duck distribution on the prairies and settling patterns. So, you know, they're very small, very shallow, at extraordinarily high risk to drainage because they're small and shallow.
Great. Yeah, and I think for the listener, like, when someone says which came first, chicken or the egg, I don't know that there's a real answer for that one. Maybe somebody has that one, but when it comes to which comes first, water or ducks, maybe if we say that one, it's so easy. If you don't have water, you don't have ducks.
Right,
and
that's
so
right.
That's why
we care.
Our members and listeners hear us talking so much about water.
Right.
You literally can have all the grass in the world. If there's no water there aren't going to be ducks.
Right, that's right.
You can have other things there, but you're just not going to have the ducks. So what are some of the things? Jim Fisher, you name dropped. One of the guys on your team. What are some of the big things he's working on?
Well, I mean, in Manitoba, that program has grown. That there's about $2.5 million every year being spent to conserve those small wetlands and cropland. And Jim showed me some statistics. These are really small wetlands, 0.1, 0.2 acres. I mean, we're talking about thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these basins that have been conserved as a result of this. So it was growing outcomes in watersheds, and then the wetland portion is called the Small Wetland Incentive Program. Shallow Wetland Incentive Program.
And those are currently in Manitoba.
Currently in Manitoba.
So his other efforts are to establish similar efforts
in Alberta. We're focused for the last number of years has been in Alberta, where we're again through Jim's great work. The Alberta government here in July announced a new private land stewardship conservation program that again specifically identified small wetlands and cropland, and Jim is working with a bunch of partners in conservation and agriculture to get a proposal submitted for that this first grant cycle, the inaugural grant cycle, and we're pretty hopeful we're going to see that program get stood up in Alberta.
So good things coming.
Yeah, I think so.
Happening and coming.
And we're having good initial conversations in Saskatchewan as well.
Okay.
So.
Well, stay tuned for that, for sure. Thank you for that update. NAWCA, North American, this is the part, wetland or wetlands? I don't think it really matters, but I'm just going to go North American Wetlands Conservation Act.
Yep.
Big, critical funding mechanism from the U.S. government, funding conservation practices in the U.S. and Canada. Do you want
and Mexico.
And Mexico. Is that born out of the treaty?
It was born out of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember, we wrote the North American Waterfowl Management Plan.
Right.
And then everybody said, wow, that's a pretty cool model. And NAWCA came a few years later as the mechanism to fund the work that the plan laid out.
Gotcha. So why don't you, brought you on here, why don't you describe to the listener how NACA works? Now, maybe not so much how it's funded,
Right.
but how it's applied to the landscape.
It's entirely a grant program, so anybody can apply. It is very clear and very intentional that there has to be at least one private dollar to access the federal dollar. So it's this premise that's based on leverage and everything else. And to really be competitive, you probably need 2.5 to 3 private dollars to access that one federal dollar. And, those projects are happening, NACA projects are happening all over, from coastal restoration in Louisiana to all sorts of habitat treatments in the Intermountain West, fixing up refuges in California or Maryland, fixing WMAs in Arkansas, and doing conservation work here in the U.S. and Canadian prairies as well. So it has, and lots of partners, from land trusts to all sorts of NGO partners are active in delivering that. Interestingly enough, not Delta. We've never gotten that game, but we're very supportive of NACA because we know the outcomes are really important for ducks and duck hunters. So while Joel, it's been, 15 years since we've had a NACA dollar flow through here?
Yeah, no, it's been a long time.
Been a long time, but we know the inherent value of the program, so we continue to work with our friends at Ducks Unlimited, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, TRCP, CSF, and all the good folks that work on that every year to make sure it happens. The program's doing incredibly well. There's a piece of legislation this year. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about NACA is that the interest from the Pittman-Robertson account flows to NACA.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
And there was a bill introduced by Congressman Hurd from Colorado this spring in the House of Representatives that passed the House of Representatives, and it's on the verge of passing. We're hoping it's on the verge of passing through the Senate to reauthorize that transfer of interest from Pittman-Robertson into NACA, which has been the focus on NACA here this year.
Very good. Very good. Anything to grow that pot. I would imagine NACA needs to be reauthorized every so often.
Yeah, it was being funded. It had appropriated funds without being reauthorized for many, many years. It was reauthorized last year, and I think, don't quote me, but I think it was a 5-year reauthorization last year. Yep.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot, so if you don't have the exact figure, but what's the estimated pot of NACA money?
Well, the appropriated amount is about $50 million, I think, is the appropriations request this year. And then there's all sorts of, the PR interest, then there's other excise duty fees that end up there, some fines and some of that stuff. So in some years, the fund can be twice what the appropriation levels could be.
Rig-em-Right is an industry leader in high-quality waterfowl hunting gear and proud partner of Delta Waterfowl. From blind bags, backpacks, and gun cases to dog vests, dog stands, and dog blinds, Rig-em-Right has you and your hunting dog covered for long days in the duck marsh. And even more exciting, Rig-em-Right has launched its new mainline series decoys that are lightweight, durable, and they look awesome. Check out Rig-em-Right's complete lineup at www.rigemright.com or wherever you buy your hunting gear. Okay.
From those other sources.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the things, John, that we love so much about NACA is there's a lot of, it's the Wetlands Conservation Act, but it's not, the use of those dollars is not restricted to water, but there's a ton of conservation action targeting water, easements, term payments to keep that, the water on the landscape.
A lot of good water control structure work in places like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, California, where we go in and try to improve the management of refuges and wildlife management areas as well. So pretty expansive impact.
Yeah, I guess water is a common theme through all of the projects, but what I mean by it's not just restricted to it. There's an influence that a wetland has out into the uplands.
Yep,
through that associated upland habitat. All right, moving into the southern U.S. I am not super fluent on this, but does this bring us back to the MBHI?
Brings us back to the MBHI.
Migratory Bird Habitat Initiative.
Habitat Initiatives. In the just to give, and we covered this when we were doing the duck distribution piece a few years ago, is a lot of southern agriculture has changed a lot. And there was some research done by Mississippi State University. It was very common practice in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, North Louisiana, South Texas. It's still very common in in the Central Valley, California, that post-harvest farmers would flood those fields. And it was a way to decompose rice straw, et cetera, et cetera. Don't lose nutrients off the field. Don't, minimize soil erosion, all the rest of these things. But what changed is there was some research done by Mississippi State University that documented that fields that were inundated for more than X amount of days had a lower performance for soybeans the next year.
Gotcha.
So what happened is, well, I think that's happened. And then, we've got shorter growing seasons for shorter duration growing seasons, genetics for rice.
Okay.
They grow them on shorter timelines, so it gives more time for fall field prep. And the other challenge with a lot of that part of the world is they know the growing season is the wettest time of year.
Okay.
And so it's pretty advantageous, especially if you harvest earlier than you used to go in, harvest your crop, and then do as much prep in that field as you can for next spring, knowing that, yeah, maybe you can get in there on time, but it may be late, and it may be wet, and it may be tough to get your seed in the ground for the next year. And then, of course, this overlay of this yield drag on soybeans. So what's changed is there's a lot less water showing in those places than there was 20, 25 years ago. And that has resulted in less available habitat for ducks. And so the thing that, going back to the 2018 Farm Bill, is we talked about both conserving wetlands up here in the prairies, but we talked about incentivizing post-harvest flooding in the wintering areas to create this linkage between key breeding areas and key wintering areas. We're talking about Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and California. And if we're successful, MBHI would invest. If we're successful in convincing folks to make the investment we want them to make, that would do 500,000 acres worth of post-harvest flooding in those 5 states. So big impact. And we hope that creates an opportunity for more of a freer distribution of ducks in their historic wintering areas.
John, for the duck hunter, that's a huge win, right? The southern duck hunter.
Massive.
That's huge. Who else would, outside of the farm, who else would want more water on the landscape?
There are places where aquifers are being, depleted, so that would provide more opportunity for some inflow to those aquifers. There's really good evidence that this is a great way to keep nutrients on farm rather than ending up in creeks and watersheds and ultimately the Mississippi River, so you get a water quality benefit. Interestingly enough, the biological benefit both from ducks and shorebirds was very well documented when USDA did this in partnership with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation after the Deepwater Horizon spill. They documented extraordinarily high, especially when you flood early, you get that huge shorebird benefit too.
Okay.
And so if you like clean water, you like soil farmers want soil where it is because they own it when it's on their farm rather than rolling down a river somewhere. Water quality, wildlife habitat, minimizing soil erosion, there's lots of benefits for it.
Flooding?
I
don't know if that's been linked to it or not.
No, I can make that argument pretty well for small prairie wetlands up here. I don't know that I can make it for down there. There's probably smarter people down there that could do it, but I can't. I don't know if I'm in a position to make
well,
that argument.
That's good. You would understand our limitations because I don't have an answer to that one either. So I think kind of wrapping up, this is a great conversation, John, but I think kind of moving on, just give you an opportunity just to jump up on your soapbox. 2 or 3 hopeful sites for duck hunters that are in your mind. You go, yep, I think there's some just really good things coming, and then balance that coin. And what are a couple 3 things that you're really concerned about right now?
we talked about this, right? Is duck hunters are pretty optimistic folks, or we wouldn't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go stand in the mud and the cattails, right? But I'm really hopeful that we're going to finally have a breakthrough on this MBHI. I just had a good conversation with the partners about it today. Things seem to be working in our favor, but we've been here before and I've been frustrated. So I've kind of got PTSD on that one. But so I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about Alberta. There's been a lot of great work done there. We're losing those small wetlands and croplands in Prairie, Canada at a rate of 0.88% a year. So in 30 years, we're going to lose another quarter of our wetlands on top of historic losses, right? So we need a massive remedy in Prairie, Canada for these small wetlands. And what we're talking about in Alberta right now isn't the massive remedy. It'll be relatively modest, phase one, but what it's going to do is show us and give us the opportunity to let people touch, feel, and smell it for a little bit, and hopefully invest in it in a bigger scale down the line. So those are the two things that I'm sort of most excited about. And again, these are two things that Delta's had a unique sort of leadership position on. Both the MBHI was born in our working wetlands in our old office building a couple doors down, right? You sat there and watched it. And grow and SWIP in Manitoba and then SWIP in Alberta, when the benefits are fully realized, 100% Jim Fisher's work. So, those are a couple things that I'm really, really excited about. Hopeful, but excited as well.
Yeah. How about, what's the other side of the coin? Some big concerns.
I mean, I think the Farm Bill got pretty politicized this year. Has happened in the past. And I don't care what side of the political spectrum you are on, that isn't good for anybody, right? And listen, there's a place for vigorous disagreement, but when it comes to the Farm Bill, this has sort of been the last great bastion of bipartisanship. And I think we saw that strained a little bit over the last, and I think Republicans and Democrats both own a little of that, candidly. And so I'd like to see that turn back around the way it was. I expect that people sort of look at this, our current condition, and go, you know what? In the future, we got to do better to make it like it was, where you can see members of the House, Ag Committee, whether you're in the majority or the minority, walking down the hall and collaborating, right? And so that's one thing that I'd like to see significantly improve when we get this Farm Bill finally done and going into the next one.
That's a great goal. Yeah, but I can see why it's a cause for concern, because
Right.
there's a potential for just literally fighting over something that everybody may love. They just can't agree for their own political reasons.
Yep.
So hopefully that's not the case. So I guess kind of wrapping up here, I want to start with a statement and then just kind of ask you a question. So the statement is that, John, you and your policy team, your growing policy team, have been so successful both on the ag conservation side and on the hunting side. I think it's safe to say that you wouldn't have any of that success if you weren't representing duck hunters and
Absolutely, positively, for sure. If it was just I'm a guy with a good idea, I think when we go into an office, folks recognize, whether we're meeting with a minister in Saskatchewan or meeting with a member of Congress or meeting with a member of the administration, it's implicit that we're here representing our membership and duck hunters at large.
Yeah, so analogy guy, our duck hunters, our constituents are the spear, and you're holding the spear.
Right.
Basically, right? And so, again, I would think it's just so important to talk about the benefits, the importance for the mission of our chapters, our volunteers, our members, and we thank everybody. Let's focus in on an individual right now out there in small town USA, small town Canada, big cities across America and Canada. What in general, what can an individual hunter do to help you make a positive impact, help Delta, help your team make a positive impact on these issues?
You know, a lot of folks will have seen, whether it's on social media or emails they get, we do action alerts with some frequency. That's our bag to members, volunteers, duck hunters at large to get involved in a specific item. In a lot of the stuff we deal with is arcane, boring, kind of like that long meeting we were in.
Strike that.
No, the Delta's leadership will watch us, hopefully, or they may not make it this long. And so a lot of it is just in the sausage making, right? Nobody wants to watch sausage being made. We all like it when it comes out of the pan and it's hot. But there are moments that our team is, whether it's Jim and Brian in Canada, or it's Cyrus, Chris, and Jeff, or myself here in the United States, there are going to be these moments where people are going to need to hear from you. And when you get that email or you see it on social media, Cyrus has done a remarkable job of creating a tool that is so remarkably easy to use. It will take you minutes. And Cyrus has got to the point where, he sends a URL, one of those, I don't even know what they call those square things that you can put on your computer. What do they call them? Cole, what do they call those things? Huh? Yeah, those
QR code.
Yeah. That's what it is. Sorry, old guy problem. But we can run campaigns off of those. We did one talking about refuges here back in February, and he had it on his screen, and people were filling out the campaign off the screen on a shared PowerPoint presentation. So I guess what I'd say is it's important to pay attention. A lot of these decisions have big consequences for all of us. And when we say we need you, we do. It's a great way for duck hunters to be heard. And let your friends know when these sorts of things happen as well. We just went through a big deal that was fairly public about public lands here this summer. And I think that was a great example of what happens when hunters sort of universally stand up and say how they feel about an issue. And so I think we can have those kind of impacts on lots of issues at very specific moments of time. The last thing we're going to do is fill up your email inbox with a bunch of junk. But when you get one on one of these issues, it's an important time, in a time when policymakers really need to hear from you.
Well, thank you for that call to action. As you were talking about how simple that was, I was picturing the caveman Geico commercial. It's so simple, even a caveman can do it.
Yeah, it was so easy. John Devney, a duck hunter, can do it. Yeah.
Easy. Well, like everybody at Delta, John, I know you welcome phone calls, you welcome emails.
Absolutely.
So I encourage anybody, question for me, question for John, anybody on his team, please do so. Jump on our website, call the office. We'll call you back.
Yep, absolutely. Obviously some big opportunities, some big stuff on the horizon that has the potential to change the world significantly for the better for ducks and duck hunters. And we're just delighted to be here working on behalf of Delta members, Delta volunteers, Delta donors, and duck hunters at large, doing what we can do to help make the world a better place.
Well, one constant in life is change. And so I'm glad to have you and your team out there working. So keep it up, man.
We'll do our very best.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Joel.
You bet.
The Voice of the Duck Hunter, a podcast presented by Delta Waterfowl.